She thought it would be just another ordinary morning, scrubbing floors and dusting furniture, but life had other plans. When she walked into the old mansion that day, she didn't expect to find the man who lived there, an aging millionaire, gasping for air, his trembling hand reaching toward her. What he whispered before collapsing would change everything she believed about her life, her past, and her worth. What she did next, no one could have seen coming. Stay with me until the end, because this story will break your heart, then piece it back together. But before we dive in, take a quick second to like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Ready? Let's begin. For 3 long years, Ella Martinez had worked inside the Grand Harrington estate, a sprawling mansion tucked deep in the hills of Charleston, South Carolina. Every morning at exactly 6 o'clock, she pushed open the heavy oak doors with her cleaning supplies in hand, her black and white uniform crisp and spotless. The marble floors reflected the glow of the chandeliers like still water, and her soft footsteps echoed down the endless halls filled with oil paintings worth more than she could ever imagine. At 34 years old, Ella was a single mother of 2 bright kids who were her entire world. She had learned early in life to stay quiet, to work hard, and to never ask questions. Wealthy families preferred their maids invisible, present enough to serve, but never seen, never heard. And Ella had perfected that art, or so she thought. But Mr. Benjamin Harrington wasn't like the others. At 78, with silver hair and a slow, deliberate walk aided by a cane, he was the rare kind of man who still believed in kindness. Every morning, he greeted Ella by name, asked how her children were doing in school, and sometimes left small surprises on the counter. A storybook for her daughter, a tiny model truck for her son. Those gestures, simple as they were, had become small lights in Ella's long days. Even so, Ella never allowed herself to relax. She had seen what happened when maids became too familiar with their employers. Rumors started, people whispered, and jobs disappeared. So she smiled, said thank you, and kept her distance. Behind her calm, polite smile, though, there was always the quiet fear of losing the only stability she had. The mansion itself was a world of its own. 12 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a library that stretched 2 stories high, and a study where Mr. Harrington spent most of his waking hours. Every Tuesday and Friday, Ella would quietly enter that room to dust the endless shelves of leather-bound books, polish the mahogany desk until it gleamed, and carefully empty the wastebasket filled with crumpled notes written in his sharp, slanted handwriting. Over the past few months, she'd noticed how fragile he had become. His once steady hands now trembled when he lifted his coffee cup. His breath came shorter when climbing the grand staircase. Sometimes she'd find him staring out of the window, eyes distant, as if he was watching memories instead of the garden below. She didn't ask questions, but deep down, she knew something was wrong. His son, David, showed up once a month, always in an expensive suit, always glued to his phone, and always gone within exactly 1 hour. Ella often overheard pieces of their conversations through the half-closed study door. Business deals, stock reports, and talks about the estate as if it were a company, not a home. Mr. Harrington barely spoke during those visits, his silence saying more than words ever could. Then there was his daughter, Rebecca, who lived all the way in California. She called every Sunday at precisely 3 o'clock, and even from the hallway, Ella could hear Mr. Harrington's voice soften when he spoke to her. He'd ask about her job, her husband, the kids he'd never met. The calls never lasted more than 15 minutes, just long enough to remind him how far away his family really was. It was a crisp Thursday morning in October when everything changed. Ella arrived at her usual time, unlocking the side door with the key Mr. Harrington had trusted her with. She brewed a fresh pot of coffee, as she always did, and began sorting through the mail stacked on the counter, bills, business letters, and a thick envelope stamped with a hospital logo. The words printed on it were medical terms she didn't understand, but she knew bad news when she saw it. When 8 o'clock came and the house was still silent, Ella felt a strange uneasiness tighten in her chest. Mr. Harrington was always awake early, usually seated in his study by 7:30, reading the newspaper with his coffee steaming beside him. She hesitated for a moment, then placed the mail aside and began walking up the marble staircase, her footsteps soft against the thick carpet runner. She stopped outside his bedroom and knocked gently. No answer. She waited a few seconds, then knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Something was wrong. The silence in that enormous house felt heavier than usual, pressing against her like a weight she couldn't explain. Ella's hands trembled as she turned the handle and peeked inside. The room was empty, the bed untouched, but somewhere down the hall came a faint sound. A shallow gasp, a soft wheeze. Her pulse quickened. She followed the noise to the study, where the door stood slightly ajar. Through the narrow opening, she saw him slumped over in his leather chair, one hand gripping his chest, the other clutching the armrest with desperate strength. "Mr. Harrington!" she cried, rushing across the room. His face was pale, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead. His breathing came in short, ragged bursts, each one sounding weaker than the last. Ella dropped to her knees beside him. "Should I call an ambulance?" she asked, already reaching for the phone. He shook his head faintly, his voice barely a whisper. "No, not yet." His eyes searched for hers with startling intensity. "I've been waiting for you, Ella." Her hand froze mid-air. "Waiting for me?" Before she could say more, he reached out and gripped her wrist with surprising strength for a man so frail. "Please," he said, struggling for air. "I need to tell you something first." "Something important." Ella froze, her heart pounding in her ears. "What is it, Mr. Harrington?" she whispered. With a trembling finger, he pointed toward the desk. "Bottom drawer," he said between labored breaths. "The key's in the pencil holder." She hurried to the desk, her hands shaking as she searched. Inside the holder, beneath a few pens and paper clips, she found a small brass key. When she unlocked the drawer, she pulled out a thick manila envelope, sealed, heavy, and marked with her name in his neat handwriting. Her breath caught in her throat. "That envelope," he managed, his voice rasping like dry wind, "holds something I should have done a long time ago. Something I was too proud to face." He stopped, struggling to breathe, then looked at her again, with eyes full of regret. "I need you to promise me, Ella. Promise you'll do what's inside, no matter what happens." She clutched the envelope, confused and terrified. "I don't understand, sir. What's in here?" "Open it later," he whispered, his words fading with each syllable. "After I'm gone. But promise me now." Ella's throat tightened. She nodded without thinking. "I promise." A faint smile softened his features, the first she had seen from him in months. "Thank you," he breathed. "You have no idea what that means to me." For a moment he closed his eyes, and she thought he was gone. Then they fluttered open again, clearer than before. "Ella," he said, his voice trembling but steady, "you've been more family to me these past 3 years than my own children ever were. Your kindness reminded me that decency still exists. You saw me as a person, not a paycheck, and that meant everything to an old fool like me." His words hit her like a wave. Ella's eyes filled with tears she didn't even try to hide. But before she could speak, his breathing grew uneven again, and she realized time was running out. "Now," he whispered weakly, "call the ambulance. And Ella, remember your promise." With shaking hands, Ella grabbed the phone and dialed 911. Her voice trembled as she gave the address, explaining between shallow breaths that her employer was having trouble breathing. Within minutes, the distant sound of sirens broke through the morning silence, echoing through the quiet streets of the wealthy neighborhood. When the paramedics rushed into the study, their boots clicked sharply against the marble floors. They surrounded Mr. Harrington, moving quickly, attaching monitors and checking his pulse. Ella stood frozen in the corner, clutching the manila envelope to her chest like it was the only solid thing left in her world. One of the medics glanced up. "Ma'am, are you family?" She shook her head. "No, I'm his housekeeper. Do you have contact information for his next of kin?" "Yes," she whispered, fumbling through the papers on his desk until she found a contact list. "His son, David, the number's here." As they wheeled him toward the front door, Mr. Harrington's eyes found hers one last time. His lips moved silently, but she didn't need to hear the words to understand them. Promise. The house fell unbearably quiet after they left. Ella wandered into the kitchen and sat down at the table, the envelope still clutched in her hands. She stared at it for a long time, her mind spinning. What had she promised? What could possibly be inside that would matter so much? The coffee she'd made earlier sat cold in the pot, untouched, just like the life she thought she understood, now completely changed. Hours passed, though Ella barely noticed. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second stretching longer than the last. She couldn't bring herself to open the envelope, not yet. Mr. Harrington had been clear after he was gone. So, to keep her mind from spinning, she did what she always did when life became too heavy. She cleaned. She moved through the mansion like a ghost, dusting, sweeping, polishing every corner of the place as if scrubbing away the fear itself. The smell of lemon polish filled the air. Yet no matter how spotless everything became, the weight in her chest didn't lift. Every time her eyes caught the envelope on the counter, her stomach twisted. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, her phone rang. She hesitated before answering. "Ella, it's David," came the sharp, businesslike voice on the other end. "I'm at the hospital. The doctors say my father had a massive heart attack. He's in intensive care, but they don't think he'll make it through the night." Ella's hand tightened around the phone. "I'm so sorry, sir. I need you to stay at the house tonight," he continued. "If the hospital calls, someone needs to answer. My sister's flying in from California, but she won't arrive until morning." "Of course," Ella said softly. "I'll stay." And Ella, his tone shifted, colder, almost suspicious. "Don't touch anything in his study. There may be documents we'll need to review later." When the line went dead, she stared at the phone for a long moment, feeling a chill run through her. She hadn't told him about the envelope, and deep down she knew she couldn't, not yet. The secret felt sacred, something meant only for her and the man who had trusted her with it. That night she called her neighbor to say her kids would need to sleep over again. Then she made herself a small dinner she couldn't finish, sitting alone at the kitchen table, the envelope beside her plate like a silent guest. She waited, heart pounding, for a call she didn't want to receive. At 11:37 it came. "Ella." David's voice cracked this time. "My father passed away 20 minutes ago." She closed her eyes, and tears slipped down her face before she even realized she was crying. After the call ended, Ella sat in the kitchen, surrounded by silence so deep it almost hummed. The man who had shown her unexpected kindness, the one who asked about her children and remembered her birthday, was gone. The house, once full of quiet life, now felt hollow, every shadow heavier than before. Her eyes drifted to the envelope. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. She hesitated for a long time, then slowly slid a knife under the flap and opened it. Inside was a stack of legal documents stamped with the seal of Patterson and Green, one of the city's most prestigious law firms. On top of them lay a folded letter written in Mr. Harrington's familiar handwriting. "My dear Ella," it began, "if you're reading this, then my time on this earth has ended. and you are about to learn something that will change everything you know about your life. Please have the strength to carry out what I ask of you, because it is the most important thing I've ever left behind." Ella's pulse quickened. Her hands shook as she turned the page. 43 years ago, the letter continued, I made a terrible mistake. I fell in love with a woman named Clara Williams. Beautiful, strong, and far too good for me. But I was a coward. I cared more about what society thought than what my heart felt. And when she became pregnant, I abandoned her. I gave her money, told her to disappear, and convinced myself I was doing the right thing. But I wasn't. I was just afraid. Ella's breath caught in her throat. Williams. That was her last name. Her heart started to pound as she read on. That woman, Clara, was your grandmother, and the child she carried, your mother. Ella, you are my granddaughter. You have been working in my house, caring for me, showing me compassion I never earned, and all this time, I've been too ashamed to tell you the truth. She dropped the letter onto the table, her mind spinning. Her knees felt weak, and for a moment, she thought she might faint. Mr. Harrington, the man she worked for, the man she pitied, the man who treated her like family, was her grandfather. Ella pushed back from the table, her heart racing so fast she could barely breathe. She began pacing the kitchen in circles, her bare feet silent against the tile floor. Every thought tangled inside her head, disbelief, anger, grief, confusion. The man she'd worked for all these years wasn't just her employer. He was her blood. Her mother had died when Ella was 25, taking with her the silence of an entire lifetime. Whenever Ella asked about her grandparents, her mother would change the subject, her eyes growing distant and sad. Now the missing pieces were falling into place, and they cut deep. With trembling hands, she returned to the table and kept reading. I know this truth will hurt, the letter continued, and you have every right to hate me. But I need your help to make things right. Enclosed, you will find my will. Everything I own, the house, the accounts, the investments, it all belongs to you now. But there are conditions. Ella's fingers brushed through the documents. The numbers made her dizzy. Sums she couldn't even imagine, assets worth more than she'd ever seen. She looked back at the letter, her breath shaking. My first condition, it read, is that you must find your grandmother Clara. She is still alive, living in a nursing home in Memphis. For the past 15 years, I've been paying for her care anonymously, but she doesn't know the help came from me. I need you to tell her the truth, that I never stopped loving her and that I am sorry. Tears blurred Ella's vision. She pressed the letter to her chest and whispered, Oh God. My second condition, the letter continued, is that you must tell my children, David and Rebecca, who you really are. They deserve to know the truth about our family, no matter how painful it may be. They will be angry. They will fight you. But I've made sure my wishes are legally protected. The inheritance is yours by right, by blood. Ella's hands trembled as she lowered the letter. The house was silent again, but the weight of his words filled every corner. He had left her a fortune, and a storm she would have to walk through alone. By sunrise, Ella hadn't slept a minute. The documents sat spread across the table like pieces of someone else's life. Yet every word, every signature, had her name written into it. When the morning light spilled through the tall windows, she knew what she had to do. She gathered everything carefully into the envelope and waited in the living room. The air felt thick, like the house itself was holding its breath. At exactly 8 o'clock, the front door opened. David stepped in first, his suit wrinkled, his face pale from exhaustion. Behind him came Rebecca, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, her expression composed but cold. Ella, David said, loosening his tie. I thought I told you to take the day off. I know, she said quietly. But there's something you both need to hear. Rebecca crossed her arms, glancing around the room. "We really don't have time for this. There's too much to handle already." "This is about your father," Ella said, her voice trembling but steady. She placed the thick envelope on the coffee table between them. "He left this for me before he passed. He made me promise to share it with you." David frowned. "Left what for you?" His tone sharpened. "Ella, if you're trying to claim he said something, just know that verbal promises don't hold up in court." "It's not verbal," she said, pushing the envelope toward him. "Everything's in writing." Rebecca stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she spotted the law firm's letterhead. "Those are legal documents. Where did you get these?" "From your father," Ella replied softly. "Yesterday morning. Just before the ambulance came." David snatched the envelope from the table and began flipping through the papers. His face went red as he read the first page. "This is insane," he muttered. "It says here, he left everything to you." Rebecca let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "That's absurd. Ella, whatever this is, it's a mistake, or worse. You forged something, didn't you?" "I didn't forge anything," Ella said, standing tall despite her shaking hands. "Your father knew exactly what he was doing. And there's more. Something you both need to hear before you say another word." David's grip tightened around the papers. "The only reason this would happen," he snapped, "is if you manipulated a sick old man into changing his will. How long were you planning this, Ella? How long were you pretending to care?" "I never pretended," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. "I cared about him long before I knew the truth." "What truth?" Rebecca demanded. Her voice cut like glass as she snatched the letter from David's hand. Her eyes scanned the page, and suddenly her face lost all color. "Oh, my God." David frowned. What? What does it say?" Rebecca looked up at Ella, her voice barely above a whisper. "He says, you're our sister." The room went completely still. David's laugh was harsh, disbelieving. "Our what?" He grabbed the letter and read the lines himself. His expression shifted from anger to shock to confusion. "This can't be real." "It's real," Ella said quietly. "Your father fell in love with my grandmother, Clara Williams, over 40 years ago. My mother was their child. That makes me his granddaughter. And your sister." Rebecca staggered back a step, her hand over her mouth. No, he would have told us. He would have told us something like that. But he didn't," Ella said softly. "He carried that guilt his entire life. That's why he treated me differently. Why he remembered my kids' birthdays. Why he asked about my life. He knew who I was." David began pacing, his voice sharp again but shaky underneath. "Even if this is true, and I'm not saying it is, it doesn't mean he had the right to give away everything we built. We're his legitimate children." Ella took a deep breath, her voice steady now. "And I'm his blood too. The DNA test is in that envelope, done 6 months ago. He wanted to be sure before telling me. The results are right there." Rebecca's eyes darted between them. "DNA test? He actually did that?" "Yes," Ella said. "And when he learned the truth, he decided to fix what he broke." David stopped pacing, his jaw clenched. "You blackmailed him, didn't you? You found out somehow, through those medical records or his papers, and used it against him." "That's not what happened," she said quietly. "He gave me something you can't fake, forgiveness, and I gave him peace." The words hung in the air, raw and heavy, as David stared at her, but beneath the anger in his eyes, something else was beginning to surface. Doubt. "You expect us to believe that?" David said, his voice rising. "A maid just happens to find out she's the heir to millions of dollars. You must think we're stupid." Ella's eyes filled with tears, but her voice didn't waver. "I didn't ask for this. I never wanted his money. I just wanted to do my job, go home to my kids and live a quiet life. But your father wanted to make things right, for all of us." "Guilt doesn't rewrite bloodlines," Rebecca said sharply. "And it doesn't make you family." Ella's voice broke slightly. "He thought differently. He told me I was the daughter he should have raised. He said I showed him kindness when no one else did. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with something between disbelief and heartbreak. Then David rubbed a hand over his face, his anger fading into exhaustion. So what now? You get the mansion, the money, and we're supposed to just accept that? You can contest the will if you want, Ella said softly. But your father worked with one of the top law firms in the state to make sure it was airtight. He knew you'd find it. He even said so in his letter. Rebecca crossed her arms, though her voice had lost its edge. Even if what you're saying is true, this feels wrong. He barely talked to us these past few years. And now, suddenly, everything goes to you. He didn't stop loving you, Ella said gently. He was just ashamed. Every time he saw you, he saw the man who abandoned the woman he loved, and the family he never had the courage to claim. David's expression softened, his eyes darting toward the floor. He never said that. He didn't have to, Ella whispered. You could hear it in his silence. Rebecca took a shaky breath, her eyes scanning the documents again. There's something here. About our grandmother, Ella nodded. Your father's first condition. He wanted me to find her. She's alive, in a nursing home in Memphis. He's been paying for her care for 15 years. She never knew it was him. Rebecca's lips parted in shock. He's been supporting her all this time. Yes, Ella said softly. And he wanted me to tell her that he never stopped loving her, that he's sorry for everything. David sank onto the couch, his voice low. He did all that, and never told us. He carried the guilt alone, Ella said. But before he died, he wanted peace, not just for himself, but for all of us. The room fell silent. The morning light poured through the tall windows, painting everything in gold. For the first time, none of them looked like enemies. They just looked like a family that had been broken for too long. Rebecca wiped her eyes. What will you do now? Ella smiled faintly. What he asked me to. I'll visit my grandmother. I'll tell her the truth. Then I'll start the foundation he planned to help single mothers, women like my mom, women like me. He called it the Clara Williams Foundation. David looked at her, his voice quiet. He wanted that. Yes, she nodded. He said I should use what he left me to do good, to make sure no one else has to choose between dignity and survival. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Rebecca reached out, her voice trembling but kind. If you really are our sister, maybe we can help. Ella's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were warm. He would have liked that, she whispered. Later, at the funeral, the church overflowed with people, friends, business partners, even strangers whose lives Mr. Harrington had touched without them knowing. When Ella stepped to the podium, every eye turned to her. Her voice shook at first, but then steadied as she looked toward the casket. Benjamin Harrington wasn't a perfect man, she began, but he was brave enough to face the truth before it was too late. He taught me that love doesn't end where mistakes begin. It just waits for forgiveness. Her eyes glistened as she smiled softly. He once told me that kindness can heal what money never could. And he was right. Because sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't wealth. It's the chance to make things right. When she stepped down, David and Rebecca were waiting. Rebecca squeezed her hand. David nodded once, his eyes red but sincere. And as Ella left the church that day, she looked up at the sky, bright, open and endless, and whispered, I kept my promise.